So I hope everybody's doing well out there. We are back. It's Meaning Making 101. I'm Chris.
I'm DJ.
And this is a special series during which we've been covering John Vervaeke's Awakening from the Meaning Crisis series. We are now up to episode 38 on agape and cognitive science. Well, let's jump on in. So last episode, we considered how might we articulate religio to help us attend to the perennial problems. How would we define religio really fast? That is...
What is like a set of practices and...
enlightenment. I think it is kind of another word for that state of being in a religious state or a state of enlightenment or...
I guess religion without...
heightened consciousness.
Without the, religion without the dogmatic component of it. What is the essence of what religion does, not necessarily which religion.
Keep talking for a moment. I'm going to look that up.
Yeah, let's... Oh, man. This thing keeps dropping. Do I have a quarter in my pocket? I do not have a quarter in my pocket. Oh, I do have
the
a
Oxford
quarter.
Dictionary, the belief in or worship... not that one. No, religio.
Doesn't know because, yeah, these words are new.
Well, no, that's an old
Greek
word.
I know. It's being censored by the interwebs.
Combining form. It is the coming together. So it is like the communal aspect of wisdom cultivation, of enlightenment traditions, wisdom schools, all of these things. We're trying to cultivate the state of enlightenment. And the question that we're trying to cover, or we were in the previous episode, that Vervaeke, I should say, was trying to cover, was how might we reverse engineer enlightenment such that we can understand how we can cultivate it as a counteractive source, a counteractive dynamical system. So a set of systems, like the Eightfold Path in Buddhism, for instance, a set of systems that allow us to cultivate enlightenment in order to deal with, counteract the force of disillusion in our societies and within ourselves. And this is awakening from the meaning crisis at its core, basically. So we're really deep in it now, guys. And if any of this seems interesting, if you're familiar with John Vervaeke or you've never heard of him before, but you have noticed the crisis of meaning occurring in our world today, the breakdown, the ongoing and growing division, then this was made for us in this time. And Vervaeke has put his life's work into this project. And this is the beginning of a path that we can share in together.
So we did a real quick overview of how the mind works and then where it falters within each of its functional, structural, and developmental areas. So we talked about self-organization, trade-off relationships. The bad part of that is parasitic processing, self-ID. The negative end of that is modal confusion, self-reflection, which is the unoptimized reflectiveness gap, which you need reflectiveness to remove yourself from a problem to be able to see the problem. But if you reflect too much, then you can't act.
So that's our self-identification side.
That's the self-reflection side.
Self-reflection.
Self-ID is the modal confusion between being mode and having mode.
Oh, yes, there we are.
And then on the structural end, we have the agent arena issues. So you have self to the world, which is this clash of perspectives, absurdity, self to self.
The sense of absurdity in what's happening in the world and in the things that you see coming out of the world. Yeah.
And then you have the clash of perspectives, which is self to self.
That's people interacting, basically.
Not clash of perspectives.
Self to others.
Hold on, that was wrong. It's self-deception, which is anxiety is self to self. And then self to others is alienation.
That's right. So the experience of absurdity when experiences within themselves, the sense of anxiety when experiences along with others, around others.
No.
Or am I mixing that up?
The absurdity is self to the world. The world is drastically changed in a way where you no longer have a meaningful grasp of what it is.
That's right. So that your relation with the world, the relation with yourself
is the anxiety.
Is the anxiety.
And then relationship with others, yourself to others, is alienation.
Is alienation.
And we're not going to go too deep into it because the next part we go
Thank
over
you for
goes
reviewing
real
that, 'cause I
deep.
didn't have that part in my notes right. Well, that makes a lot
Yeah,
more sense.
I have it written weird, so it kind of threw me off. And then on
great breakdown, dude. That's awesome.
your developmental end,
Alienation, of course, is others. Anxiety is something that we're experiencing because of our own thoughts, and then self to the world, the modal confusion of agent and arena. Confusing what kind of arena you're in, and the lack of understanding of oneself as an agent.
or having your fundamental framings broken too much to the point of horror.
You don't know how to frame in this new reality. Oh, yeah, for sure. That's happening
because
a lot.
absurdity
The
goes into
experience
horror.
of domicide that we went over in previous episodes.
So on our developmental end, and understanding that our cognition is self developmental, you can there's developed by functioning, and its issues is existential inertia, which needs anagoge, and external inertia is got to do this, got to do that, got to do this, got to do that. I need to do this thing, I need to do that thing. And then the other end, the function by developing, is existential ignorance. Well,
Here we
should
are.
I
Okay.
should
I
I
wasn't even on the right page. I see where we're
we
at.
go over it again, so
Yeah.
that's the one thing that's confusing. These
That's
are just
right,
the quick
because
points.
he continually broke it down throughout this episode.
Yeah, and that's basically where we're at right now. Is
So we have these functional, structural, and developmental.
yeah. So yeah,
What would we call that? The functional, like not modes, but the functional, structural, and developmental
processes
sides of our processing, aspects to our processing, we can say. All right.
And so we're back to self-organization and parasitic processing.
Which
so
is
what do we
functional.
What do we do about this? Is now at this point in the episode we're talking about what do we do? And
Yeah, because we have this capacity to deceive ourselves. We have the capacity to BS ourselves, and so that's parasitic processing.
particularly with like a buildup of heuristics that end up taking over and are no longer fit to the task. Like I've mentioned this before, but like you get bitten by a dog once, and you think, okay, well, screw that dog, but then you start freaking out, and it's like, well, more dogs or all dogs of that breed, and then just all dogs, and well, I got to stay away from dogs that freak out, and even the sound of dogs now, and this thing's giving me so much trouble. And it just loops and loops and loops. So what he proposes that we cultivate a counteractive dynamical system, internalized system. And the example was the cultivation of the Eightfold Path. That was just one example.
And we see the path of following Christ in Christianity to learn how to emulate the one who most perfectly embodied the state of agape, of unconditional lovingness for all things and everyone.
So to get over the self-ID modal confusion issue, we talked about this before during a previous episode, but sati,
that kind of awakening,
remembering to the proper mode and orientation. From the having. Well, I need to have a family. I need to have a house.
Because we can have a having mode orientation to everything in life.
Yeah.
And then we're in this constant state of wantonness. Yeah. And that's a miserable state to be in, because whatever you get never quite fills the void. It never quite satiates. Maybe temporarily, like some artificial flavoring can, or some junk food can temporarily satiate your hunger, but it's really not going to be nutritious for you and help you grow optimally.
A good example he made in the episodes talking about that was you have sex opposed to like making love.
So having mode versus being mode.
Yeah, so
that's where we're at.
Sati helps with the self-identification issues.
The being mode.
The reflection issue is getting into the flow state. So, not just going overly reflective, but getting into this the what is that
the optimal
it's the I want to say the canal of optimal functioning.
Oh yeah.
Basically just above your competency level, but not so much you get anxiety.
That's an old one.
By getting into that state.
Trajectory of optimal or something like that.
Yeah, by getting into that state, you're able to.
It's basically
balance.
That state is where you're at the edge of your ability.
Yeah.
And what is the other side of that?
Anxiety. So being just above your competency level, but not so much that you get anxious.
Right on the edge of what you can handle. So it's
area,
consistently challenging.
Yeah, that
and
area
you can get it. That's how you can trigger a flow state.
And that'll help you not become so reflective that you are no longer engaged.
So it takes a lot of preparation and skill training, basically, at whatever you're trying to do in the flow state.
Yeah, you actually have to get good at something that can trigger the flow state.
Yes.
Through practice,
right.
Whether it's like music, video games, sports. Being a good debater, a conversation haver, stuff like that.
Right. In all aspects of life. And this is being mode. So, and the problem here, the reason we're talking about having mode and being mode right now is because we can get them confused. The things that we need to satiate our being mode, we try and approach through a having mode orientation. And that orientation is constantly self-destructive.
Yeah. So for the clash of perspective, this what do you call it? Absurdity. It's what is it? Sentia perspectiva. It's a scaling up and down of perspective at the same time. So getting into the kind of non-dual thing, but at another level, to do with anxiety, internalizing the sage. And we're going to go deeper into these in the next section of these notes as well. This is just the list that he gave us, so we know what we're talking about. Alienation, this idea of communitas, which gives you a sense of connectedness to others. His example was the authentic discourse movement. And then there's existential entrapment, and that in gnosis is the thing that'll help with that. So getting into a...
And let's just run through all of that as we go here, because this is going to be a lengthy review.
I'm almost done.
All right.
All of this must be within a wisdom framing.
Yep.
So we must avoid self-deception, while encouraging, self-enlightenment or,
right.
self-embigment.
So we hope correct for the functional, structural, and developmental mistakes and divergences that we make, and the symptoms of them, the absurdity, the existential inertia, the parasitic processing. All of these things are interacting and exacerbating each other. So we are looking for a counteractive system of psychotechnologies. And the term psychotechnology is just like anything that we use to either communicate or develop something mentally, such as we use language to speak, and we can get better at speaking. There's very many psychotechnologies. Mathematics are another, and we're looking for those wisdom psychotechnologies, such as mindfulness, that encompasses self-reflection and contemplation.
And the important part is
movement practices can be brought into this.
While reverse engineering this enlightenment, we must do it in a demystified and practical way in order to create a scientific theory of enlightenment. So it's not just do your sun salutations in the morning and it'll bring you to spiritual enlightenment.
No. We're literally trying to create strong firewalls and wise in minds that can cultivate wisdom. Maybe not. We're going to say that we can make minds that are wise. What is wise ultimately, but we are going to continually try and cultivate wisdom. And there's no cap to enlightenment, to the cultivation of our own inner wisdom and our capacity to understand when there is deception being wielded against us, or we are doing it to ourselves, talking ourselves down from something or out of something that we actually could achieve if we really put our hearts and minds to it. So we want to be aware of that parasitic processing and so on and so forth. And we're going to explore briefly everything and then jump into the episode here, guys.
I can get through this actually pretty quick. So
let's do it.
To deal with parasitic processing, like we said before, is cultivate a set of practices. The Eightfold Path as an example, that are independent and interdependent and basically self-rolling. So this thing, the lingo for this is counteractive dynamical systems. And he gave the goldsmith story. You got a piece of gold. You don't just look at it because nothing happens. You don't just heat it because all it does is just melt. But you also have to craft it, the art, and all those together give it value. And they're all complementary relationships to each other in order to create the golden art. So basically, psychotechnologies working together and practiced.
Yes. Yes.
So modal confusion, like we said, sati, encouraging the sati, remembering the reflectiveness gap, flow state. So both scaling up and down. So set up practices and conditions that enhance flow. So creating new systems in order to new flow state induction mechanisms, right? And we must be responsible with them as well, because you can get into the flow state and not learn a damn thing.
That's right. That's right. You want to be consciously inquisitive.
Yeah, and so to deal with absurdity, prajna.
Well, did we skip? Oh no, okay.
Yeah,
you're right. I see.
Absurdity. So prajna, which is so attention is scaling up and down. So you have a precursor argument that leads up into a meta argument, and just like letters lead into words, and we can study the epics in order to kind of get this type of intuitive knowing. So
like Spinoza mentioned, the ethics of blessedness and sacredness. Our relation with the world can be co-creative. Becoming the best person, developing the best life, not just the most morally correct. So, and to achieve this, we require worldview attunement through a practice of ethics and a logical structure of ethics that helps develop intuitive knowing.
Yeah. So basically, you got two arguments, and you can see the fittedness of each argument to the whole.
That's right. And prajna is a self-liberated state of wisdom. Simultaneously, it's us looking as far in as we can far out. And in mindfulness practice, you are practicing both. You're practicing both inquiry and you're practicing contemplation.
Yeah. So with anxiety, this inner conflict with no specific target, internalizing the sage. So creating an inner dialogue, much like, what Plato did with his dialogue.
This is to deal with anxiety.
Yes, it's to deal with that, get multiple portions of your mind talking to each other and working something out.
Yeah. That sense of something wrong that has to do with an inner conflict, but there's no specific sense of threat that's easily nameable. That's anxiety, a state of being at war within oneself. So you internalize the sage to incorporate the various centers. We need that internalized representative model, a role model of some sort. So internalize the sage, be it Socrates, be it Jesus, be it Buddha. Yeah,
and that gets into the identification. So you can internalize another's perspective, or you can indwell. And indwelling is like, what would Jesus do? Put yourself in their shoes and indwell within their shoes.
See from their eyes.
And then the internalizing is seeing from their perspective, and the indwelling is bringing it into you and doing, basically not maybe necessarily physically doing it, but going through the process of, like, if I was such and such, what would I be doing?
If I was Socrates, how would I see this situation, this question that I have for myself that I'm trying to understand?
So to deal with alienation, we have communitas, a flowing communion, a collective flow in which we feel there is real communication and common shared identity / spirit.
Like singing in church.
Look at how we have to look at how our practices of communication are undermined by the bullshit.
Yeah, so to help solve for and create a counteractive force against the alienation in our lives, we can utilize communitas, communal group flow
and
states.
His example was the authentic discourse / relating.
That's the contemplatio side of it too, in a sense. You go to church in an extroverted way to share your love with the world and with God. It's like a returning of the gift.
And it allows us to re-access other kinds of knowing.
Temple.
And how they are interdependent in the process of attunement. So coherence was a word that we used that somebody else, I won't say coined, but used for this. Sorry, I don't get the name. I'm not a name person. Communitas, engaging the collective.
Jordan Hall was that guy.
So engaging.
Jordan Hall's awesome, by the way, guys. Check him out. I'm sorry, I keep cutting you off, man.
Communitas, so engaging the collective distributed cognition. So this is allowing us to use multiple minds to work on a singular issue.
Yeah, well said. Communitas, to engage our collective intelligence.
Yeah. And
Most
freeing us of
problem-
our historical grammar
Yeah,
that can give us some trouble.
because most problem solving is done in concert. And we want to marshal our distributive cognitive networks and its collective intelligence to free us and access types of knowing to bring to bear on the problems we're facing.
Yeah.
That's a quote from
Yes,
Vervaeke.
yes. So it's giving us the tools and the ability to figure it out and do.
Yes. Together.
Yeah.
Yeah. Communally. In concert.
What's the
To
word
get
he
coherence
used?
and to solve, because there's high level problems that we're facing in this world today. We're in the midst of what has been termed a meta crisis. It's myriad existential, meaning life threatening crises to our species that are all simultaneously ongoing. And that meta crisis, how do you confront such a thing? We have to develop ourselves not just internally, solely, but in groups, and develop our capacity for being in flow with one another, to be able to have these high level problem solving, mind melding experiences that Vervaeke terms dialogos, that we're actually capable of having. You can put some, high level mindfulness practitioners, you could say, some experienced practitioners in a room together who are also practiced in like circling or other kinds of communal discourse. There's some beautiful videos on Vervaeke's channel that you guys can check out if you go and subscribe to John Vervaeke. I highly encourage you to do that.
So that system, like
Circling, mindfulness practice,
and circling, and that are emergent dynamical systems, which give people the resources to adapt themselves and everybody who's involved fittedness to the task at hand.
That's a well said.
Whether it's like a thought problem, or even if you're working to like figure out like what's broken in an engine, you get three dudes together and they all, or even better, four. You have
and
the
kind of a
person
logos develops.
Yeah,
that's like an overmind of all the intelligences at once, and it doesn't feel like any one person individually. Yet it's coming through all people, and this occurs all the time. Or it can occur all the time, I should say. It used to occur often in I think our deep past, and it was still practiced during the times of the Republic and Plato, but this has really fizzled away over the recent centuries.
Yeah. So, and then the last bit is just dealing with existential entrapment, and that's gnosis. These higher states of knowing, this open-ended mythos, ever-evolving symbol that keeps going. And it's not like a mystical mythos or anything like that. It's, remember, a mythos is a symbol in which we can use to hold on to vaster amounts of information than your mind
like
might normally,
or a meme relates to something.
Yes, and a symbol doesn't have to be a physical object either. Like mythos is not necessarily a physical object.
It's basically an educational story, species level, to teach us about how to deal with the perennial problems, the ongoing, repeating problems that we continually face as a human species.
Yeah, and
cultural problems
within these emergent dynamical systems that are building themselves as well, they can develop their own mythos, much like a fandom will do with like there's the whole mythos of Star Trek and Star Wars and Warhammer 40K and everything that is being built as it's as they're being played or as they're being watched.
And that's what these are.
Participated
Myths are transgressive, open-ended, and ongoing stories.
Yeah.
So not progressive, not regressive. Beyond both of those two, it's ever expanding.
And that's all I got.
In all directions. All right.
Hey, we did it in 25 minutes. Woo!
Right on. It's about that time, guys. We're going to be jumping in now, and we're going to be led by Professor John Vervaeke out of the University of Toronto, award-winning lecturer, Cogsci, and Qigong master, and meditation teacher, mindfulness teacher, I should say, and circling and dialogos practitioner, along with his friends Guy Sinstock and Jordan Hall and Christopher Mastropietro. And you can check out all of these guys and go to John Vervaeke's channel to find them. because there's so much more that happens after we end this 50 lecture series that we're in the midst of. But Vervaeke has put his heart and soul, and you can tell a great deal of work, thoughtful work, into creating this series for us to help us together figure out how may we awaken from the meaning crisis as one. Can't believe I got all that out. Sometimes you just have to the words speak themselves. So we're jumping in now. It's episode 38 of the series on agape and 4E cognitive science.
Agape.
Agape, wee, here we go.
Welcome back to Awakening from the Meaning Crisis. So last time we were taking a look at the perennial problems that are endemic to us precisely because of the functioning and structuring and development of our adaptive religio. The very processes that make us intelligently adaptive also make us vulnerable to self-deceptive, self-destructive behavior. And I propose to you that we can address parasitic processing with a counteractive dynamical system. We can address modal confusion by the cultivation of sati. We can address the reflectiveness gap by the cultivation of flow. We can address absurdity by cultivating prajna. We can address anxiety by cultivating inner dialogue, by internalizing the sage through a process of internalization and indwelling that allows us to identify with the sage. We can address the process of alienation through the cultivation of communitas, and I mentioned to you some new sets of communal psychotechnologies that are emerging, and people who are trying to develop thinking about how to make use of authentic relating, circling, trying to break through our current cultural grammar to a form of authentic discourse and relating. So that's on offer, and that we can respond to existential entrapment by the cultivation of gnosis, which can be empowered by a core capacity for realizing higher states of consciousness. So what you have is basically a higher state of consciousness that is empowering gnosis, right? And that, right, is of course set within. Part of gnosis, as you remember, I argued, is it has to be set within a proper ritual context, etc. I remind you all of that. And that this is being used, right, to cultivate, and of course is being reflectively transformed by a counteractive dynamical system that is going to, of course, get you sets of practices for cultivating sati, cultivating flow, cultivating prajna, cultivating communitas, cultivating inner dialogue, etc. When this is set within a wisdom framing, which so that comprehensively the person is developing interlocking sets of virtues for addressing self-deception and for affording self-optimization. And this results in a reliable response of amelioration and alleviation of the perennial problems. I would say that's enlightenment, at least the enlightenment that I'm trying to reverse engineer. The components can each ultimately be explained and understood by our best cognitive science, I believe. At least I've given you reasons that we can rationally hope that. What, of course, needs to be done is to still try and articulate wisdom from a scientific perspective. And, of course, that is one of the most exciting things that's happening right now, something that I am privileged to participate in. All of the ongoing scientific work, whether the psychological, cognitive scientific, even neuroscientific work on what does wisdom mean and how can we cultivate it. And there's just so many people, and we're going to talk about that at length. But we need to do something else, because we need to talk about the way in which this whole project, as I said, can be delegitimized, undermined, and eroded if these whole sets of practices can't be situated within a encompassing and welcoming worldview. So having a ecology of psychotechnologies for addressing the perennial problems is necessary, but of course not sufficient for responding to the meaning crisis. I've been encouraged by meeting so many people that are trying to set up, I keep worrying, I want my language to be responsive to the creativity of these individuals who are trying to create these ecologies of psychotechnologies. I've talked to Rafe Kelly, for example. He's done some amazing work on trying to bring together aspects of parkour, the martial arts, people doing something like the circling practice, right? And again, create this ecology of practices. I'm talking to Michael Nathan, and he's trying to integrate ideas about the training and cultivation of wisdom into the training of martial arts in order, again, to try and realize, an ecology of practices for responding to the meaning crisis. And so there's many people out there already doing this. So I want to indicate that I'm pointing to something that people are already doing. I'm not trying to take credit for it, but I'm hoping that, and this, I'd be getting some supportive feedback, that the work I'm doing here with you of trying to articulate that can help facilitate these groups and help them coordinate and communicate and potentially commune with each other in a mutually beneficial fashion. So a couple more things. We need to go back to this. We need to talk about the integration with the historical forces, because there's a particular issue that comes to the fore. So this is the plan for going forward. Let's talk about the interaction between the historical forces and the perennial problems. And let's talk about more explicitly, can we respond to the loss of the three orders and the worldview misattunement? And then what that would look like. And again, I'm not proposing to found. I'm trying to just talk about what I see emerging and hopefully give some suggestive steps towards, can we get that religion that's not a religion? And then put that into dialogue with other people who have engaged in a similar project, people like Tillich and Young and Corbin and Barfield. And so that we've got at least, I hope, a very rich dialogue with a lot of momentum to it for trying to get to this religion that's not a religion. Okay. So, the historical forces, the loss of the three orders, let's remember this and why it matters. So you've lost the three orders, we've lost the nomological, and the nomological basically gives us this deep sense of coherence and connectedness. Right, that is so central. We know from our current work on meaning in life, we lost the normative order, right? Which gives us, I would argue, that sense of significance, depth that we get, right? Through self-transcendence. And of course, we've lost the narrative order, which gives us a sense of purpose or direction. And then, as we've lost this, right, we have a worldview, again, in which we don't belong, in which our projects don't belong, etc. And of course, that will interact with, it will exacerbate any attempts that individuals or groups have in addressing perennial problems. And when you get that going, that's when the meaning crisis really bites you individually, or right, it gnaws at you as a person or as a community or as a group. Now, I want to talk about, first of all, this interaction because it brings up a particular problem. And here again, I'm going to point to the seminal work of Woolf, on her book on meaning in life and why it matters. So I was interviewed by Leandro on a podcast, Manifested Wellbeing, and then he then later recently interviewed Woolf and her work on meaning in life. So I recommend you going to that to take a look at her work, also reading her book. Now, if you remember, she says that meaning in life is ultimately about a kind of deep connectedness that we want. So we have all these metaphors. We want to be connected to something larger than ourselves, bigger than ourselves, etc. And that's what makes our life meaningful. And of course, it's this notion of connectedness. But she says those are metaphors. They're what I would call their symbolic expressions of what people are really saying is they want this. She talks about it this way. And think about how this just sings to everything we've been doing here. We want subjective attraction to find salient, right? And to be drawn into. We want subjective attraction to, that meets to, that connects with, that conforms to objective attractiveness. Right. So notice here, of course, the transjectivity here, that it's actually in here that the meaning is to be found. And notice also the connectivity and how much this is, the relevance realizing, the deep connection, the deep caring, the deep involvement, the deep participation. Okay, so that all lines up, but then, of course, and here's where this and this interact, right? What happens is, she says, because of this, we know there's no such thing as this. We know there's no such thing as this. The scientific revolution and the loss, there's nothing that is objectively attractive, right? This is a particular grammar, right? This is the grammar again that, right? There isn't there's no meaning or relevance in this thing, in itself. This is ultimately sort of a Kantian argument. And Woolf sort of leaves it there. She does allude to ways in which we can bullshit ourselves. We can pretend we have objective attraction just by finding a group of people who agree to value the same things we do. And that is a kind of bullshitting because the salience of the group is actually masking whether or not it's given us what we're looking for. And she criticizes all of those attempts, I think quite rightly. And that's where she sort of leaves it, at least when I read the book. I don't know if more recent work she's got an answer to it. So work I'm doing with Thalia Brentidis, Jinsun Kim, Philip Rizowick, we're really trying to say, is there a way of addressing this problem using the current cognitive science, cognitive psychology, neuroscience, etc. I won't keep saying everything that's in cognitive science. philosophy, psychology, neuroscience, machine learning? Can we use all of that, the best of that, to address this issue? See, so notice that, again, this issue is an issue in which historical forces prevent sort of the fundamental legitimation of the whole project that we would try to use to address the perennial problems. Okay, so what can we think about this? Well, part of it is, I think, to ask do we need things to be objectively valuable? So what that means is that things would have a value independent about how I would value them or how you would value them. And there's a particular move that you can make that doesn't require that the thing has objective value, right? Instead, you could think about the set of characteristics that need to exist in order for meaning to be created. So what I'm trying to point you towards, and we have to go very delicately, right? I'm trying to point you towards that it's actually the transjectivity of the relationship that we need. And we don't really need objective attractiveness. That's not quite right. So let's think about this. Relevance realization is inherently interested in itself because, as I've argued, that's constitutive of it being a self-organizing, self-correcting, self-optimizing, self-developing, evolving process. Relevance realization is not something in me. It's not something in the world. It emerges in the affordances that are co-created by the world and myself. It's bidirectional in that fashion. So what I need to be connected to, I would argue, is I need to be connected to I need to be connected to those conditions that afford relevance realization itself. Those conditions that satisfy my inherent valuing of the relevance realization process itself. So what does that mean? What that means is I ultimately want to care about the conditions that afford meaning making itself. Those conditions, right, are universal in a sense. Not in the sense that they are the same environmental conditions or the same psychological, but the same set of conditions that make possible and afford meaning making itself. Now this sounds all very abstract, and now I want to try and turn it around, and this is something that I'm arguing for, right? That when we care to create the conditions of meaning making because we find them inherently valuable, because that is constitutive of our capacity to be agents and to value anything else. When we're doing that, what we're actually engaging in is agape. Agape is to love for its own sake the process of meaning making. And the process of meaning making is the process of being a person. Ultimately. This is agape. And that's why, of course, the things that contribute most significantly to meaning in life is our sense of being connected to other people, agapically. What I'm saying to you is that there is a way of responding to this, which is the cultivation, the realization, the appreciation of agape. And you say, but there's no objective value to meaning making. Of course there isn't. But it's not subjective or arbitrary. It is transjective. And it is, in that sense, transcendental, in a Kantian sense. It is what I'm involved with are the very conditions on the possibility of meaning making itself. So to agapically love people, of course, is not just to be directed at that body and mind. It's to be directed at their conditions, their community, their environment, their development, their education. That's agape. That exists independently of me, of you, of us, of a group, because agape precedes, permeates, and follows us.
All right, we're back. Seems like a good spot to take a pause. Let us reflect.
All right.
So where have we been, man? Wow.
He broke down the schema that we're working with is so higher states of consciousness, empowering gnosis. Growing out of that is counteractive dynamical systems, and those reflecting, going from one to the other, reflecting each other.
Interlocking sets of features that result in reliable response to the amelioration, the alleviation.
Yeah, so that within a wisdom framing creates a reliable response, ameliorating, alleviating, and the amelioration and alleviation of the perennial problems. So he's calling this enlightenment.
Yes, cultivating the ongoing enlightenment of ourselves and in a communal aspect along with one another is the set of psychotechnologies that we need to counteract the interacting kind of self. They're basically exacerbating one another, the historical conditions that we're in and the repeating perennial problems that we run into as a species. So that's the schema. The wisdom framing is what's going on between the interaction between the gnosis or the higher states of consciousness that empower gnosis and the counteractive dynamical system that helps us, systems that help us cultivate sati, flow, communitas, etc.
And he mentioned also that we'd have to talk about how all this can be undermined by a lack of a welcoming worldview, if you will. How can it be undermined? And how can we prevent that is by
that's what we need to study. We need to know how the set of practices can be compromised, and then how to create conditions in which it can be best, succeed. So he brings up people like Rafe Kelly, who has integrated parkour and martial arts.
Yeah, that's the ecology of psychotechnology. So there's a lot of different people.
A lot of people that are on the edge playing with this stuff.
It's necessary, but not the be all end all.
This is what we do when we go to church.
Yeah.
We're trying to find that agape posture, that orientation to life again, where we care not just about the person, but their relation with everything and everyone around them.
Yeah. So
it's a plan for integration.
Yeah, and we need to understand that. Yeah, we need
with the historical forces and the perennial problems.
And the interactions between historical forces and perennial problems, and the overarching misattunement of our world attunement.
Yes.
A religion that is not a religion, ultimately.
How to respond to the loss of the three orders and the worldview attunement that we've lost, how to deal with that.
Yeah,
how can we achieve a religion that's not a religion in the sense of what is a religion or religious way of being in the world that we can encompass and take on and interact with together that is not disagreeable to all different kinds of peoples and cultures? What is the overriding, and the underlying...
Well, and what is the core of what religion does?
Of what religion, exactly. What is the core of what religion does?
Not necessarily what the religion says or how the practices go, but what is the core of...
So we can understand what we're doing with each of our religions and find ways that they can co-create in a communal fashion with one another instead of this constantly ongoing, fragmenting, warring fashion that we've taken on in modern context.
So the three orders, since we're going to be talking about them, the three orders are pneumological, which is coherence and connectedness, normative, which is the depth, like how deep of
Experience of significance and depth.
And then the narrative order is the purpose and direction. And narrative, you could see this as like we write stories that are narratives that have a purpose and a direction. So that's an easy way to keep track of that one.
So these are the three orders: the nomological, the normative, and the narrative.
Yeah, and we kind of lost the nomological order recently in a very deep way. Going through COVID.
Well, we've also lost our normative, the sense and depth of experience of life.
Yeah.
Only once in a while are we taken aback by a sunset or a bird in a tree.
And we've replaced our narrative our narratives with some pretty toxic crap. And by toxic, I mean like if it gets on you, it poisons you badly, and you could die.
Our sense of purpose and direction has been severely compromised.
So the loss of these three orders is really gnawing at
instead
us.
of being mode. Yeah.
And causing much anxiety.
Yeah, there's a lot of agent arena confusion going on. Yeah. So the historical forces exacerbate the perennial problems, which are the repeating challenges that an intelligent species faces that we see occurring throughout history. So he brings up Susan Wolf in her book Meaning in Life and Why It Matters. This sounds really good. She talks about the deep connectedness.
Meaning in life is about
that we
kind of connectedness. And I think not just her book, but also like the idea of meaning in life. Your meaning in life is
that we can connect with that sense of how we can want to connect with something larger and greater than ourselves. She and this is a quote. She says, "We want subjective attraction to objective attractedness." So we subjectively, inwardly, feel attracted to what outwardly we find objective, or things that outwardly would be termed objectively attractive. And she comes to this reasoning that this is kind of a postmodernist view. Because of this, there's no meaning or relevance to anything. Nothing's truly objectively attractive. We just subjectively find it so.
Yeah, and particularly the loss of the three orders as well.
This has really disrupted our sense of groundedness in the world today, because we're used to finding things objectively a certain way, and mathematics helps us to measure things objectively. So we're very much framed
to
framing
give
our world
us the illusion of absolute objectiveness, even though we know,
So what is beyond nothing matters and nothing has any meaning, or everything matters and everything has meaning, is something that
she did have a critique about bullshitting, which is like, we can find others that agree with us about anything. Therefore, we're still subject to self-bullshitting.
Yeah, so we need a solution to this. And Vervaeke notes that relevance realization is something that is inherently interested in its own process, because self-development, self-correcting processes help us.
Well, before you get to that, though, he brings up...
Yeah, sure, but then we can drop back a little bit. But relevance realization is this bidirectional process that grows itself continually the more that it has an interest in its own processing of how it's doing what it's doing. So the more we're interested in what's relevant, the more we can charge up that relevance realization machine in our minds.
Well, the question is do we need things to be...
And how to do that.
Objectively valuable. Like,
that was a question.
Do we need the lump of gold to have intrinsic value? Do we need that?
Exactly.
Instead, we should be looking at what are the characteristics that need to exist in order for meaning to be created.
That's
in a transjective way.
That is the key.
And relevance realization is inherently self-interested and self-creating.
So it charges,
self-organizing.
It's a self-running machine, basically, that can charge itself up, and it's continually adaptive.
So
that problem there is such a big problem, isn't it?
Yeah.
Because we are constantly looking at the world either subjectively, or we're trying to measure it objectively to understand it, and that we've forgotten that we have a way within us, an orientation to life that is a high interest in our co-creative involvement in the making of this world. That is the solution. And
what are
this is a way of being. That's why you hear like Jesus was known as
we need to be very much connected to those conditions that afford meaning making itself.
Yeah, early Christians were followers of the way before they were even called Christian,
Yeah,
which initially began as an insult.
Yeah, it was a slur, right?
Yeah.
Hey, interesting. Christianity took a slur and then it was like, okay, and the other way around with like the word woke. That was originally what people who are woke were calling themselves. It was like, yeah, we're so enlightened, we're woke, and now it's turned into an insult. So it's like the inverse.
Yeah, I'd be wary of calling oneself woke or identifying with groups of people that identify as woke or easily termed woke.
I'm waking up and I'm grumpy.
Because, why ever think you're done? I mean, there's infinite information around us in every direction, and it's always helpful to understand the other points of view better so that, if anything, you can argue against them if you find them to be wrong and not good and true for one and all. So we need to be awakening, ongoing, continually.
The one thing, the idea of already being woke is you don't care.
Yeah, so we're never done here, guys.
But like what Vervaeke says, one must care about these
infinite room to grow. Yeah,
one
must care deeply.
Universal and not not universal in the standard sense, but the universal. The same sets that make meaning making the same.
Universal to the sets of conditions that afford meaning making itself. Yes.
And we got to care about it. And when we care, we are engaging in agape. And that's where he brings in the agape so smoothly, loving the process of meaning making. And meaning making is the thing that makes you a person.
Mm-hmm. And caring about the conditions and those techniques, those practices, those rituals that we can involve ourselves in that help afford it. That is the key.
Yeah, that is the cure to Wolf's argument.
That we care to create and find inherently valuable meaning making. Mm-hmm. In doing so, we are engaging in agape. It's to be in love with the co-creative nature of reality.
Yeah.
Right? And this solves for the historical conditions that we find ourselves in. If masses of people start doing this, can you imagine? And it helps us it helps steel us against the perennial problems that we're continually facing as a species.
It will also help
it's
steal us.
History repeats, but it's more like it rhymes. This is what's happening. That's the perennial problems.
It should help steel us against the self-bullshitting as well, the salience without any truth to it as well. Because if you actually do care about, not just like what he was saying, the physical, somebody's physical body and whatever, but what are they doing in life? How's their mental state? How are they doing in school? How they're fulfilling their purposes? What's going on with like the actual person?
And you're actually engaged in this with others.
You don't care for the bullshit because the bullshit doesn't help you at all.
Yeah, and when we engage in this communally, we are having so many people that we can help along the way, get past some of the roadblocks and the alleyways and cul-de-sacs you can fall into, and
helping ourselves.
We have others that can help check us. And,
Well, and even the in a proper, let's say, like sapiential community, engaging in the helping of others will end up, you end up helping yourself because you're all doing this and constantly cross-checking, and then the act of being the helper informs the being the helped as well. I'm not explaining it really well, but it's this way.
But it makes sense.
It goes both ways at the same time. That's why you got people like Jordan Peterson, who seems to be probably one of the most like not just thoughtful people, but like he went through hell.
Yeah.
And he's still going through hell, and somehow he still has the gracefulness to be able to go through life and not be completely ripped down. And I think a lot of that comes from spending
still for
over
some people.
20,000 hours dealing with patience and learning how that works. And then
30 years in his career.
You're not supposed to reflect your patient in yourself, but the process, the conversations you have, you start to see how things piece together. Yeah, you don't want to imprint on your patient. That's not what I'm talking about at all. I'm just like, when you go through so many patients and you see...
He embodies a way of being, though, that is beyond personality, because it is a set of...
Yeah. And he's a really good example of that.
Characteristics that one can cultivate.
Yeah, because
anybody can cultivate.
The fact that he's a clinical psychologist is a great example because, he's taught to be able to draw things out of people in a way that, is really just them volunteering it.
Yes.
In a way that they would not be able to.
Ultimately, under the right conditions, the patient heals themselves, and I think Peterson picked this up from Carl Jung.
That's the best counselor or psychologist or whatever. That's the best one. Is you get the patient to draw it out of themselves.
Absolutely.
Instead of forcing something on them. which is modern psychology.
I always encourage therapy prior to psychiatry, and in that, you're so often going to get offered a pill these days because, these doctors, psychiatrists get kickbacks. They get, bonuses based off of.
Once I started seeing terms like
pills, and
centering in modern psychology, I started getting a little weirded out. Centering is one of those commie keywords, and they're not centering in the good way.
Well, they're stealing that from ancient ritual, though, as well, which is, just make sure you understand the context that it's in when you see the words like centering and grounding. And things like that.
You don't need to be centering your sex or your race or your religious belief in a counseling session, unless directly, I don't know, something bad happens, like something,
Well, it depends on what's happening, but you don't have to become in.
Yeah, you don't
to heal your identity, but by trying to address your outward features.
And also,
it's something that's going on inside.
Krishnamurti would argue the fact that you create a center creates a division between you and what really is. Therefore,
sure, you can identify that there's a center, and then try and look at it and realize that there's nothing really to it, but ideas and mentalization that's ongoing.
Once you create
realize
the center,
that your ego, your personality, your personage, your cast image that you hold to be yourself in your mind, is basically a misidentification. It's something that we do by mistake. We don't realize that we're these constantly amorphous and growing beings. We get very attached to our ideas. You notice, as though someone's personally attacking you violently in some way.
Well, just so
to the point that people think words are violence now.
Yeah. But the very act of, say, draw a circle and put a center in it, now you have a space between the outside edge and something in the middle, so it's a vast disconnection. It's the one of the issues I have with certain, I guess, new agey practices. It's this, seeing yourself as this little center particle of something that's separate. Like, the idea is to just get away from that, because we're already doing that.
Sometimes too. You got
to
recognize,
do that every day. We
firstly, it's got to be grounded in a practice that's recognizing the illusion that we project through our thoughts of our images of ourselves and others. Because it's a bunch of caricatures interacting with one another, and it's never us being real with one another. And when we can drop those senses of identification and the characters that we've developed of those we know, and see them as they are in this moment, then something new and fresh can happen. And that's the most beautiful thing that we're constantly seeking in life. It's that, and he speaks about that in this episode earlier on.
What is it that the spoon kid from The Matrix said? There is no spoon. It's not about bending the spoon, because there is no spoon. It's really just yourself. So that's yes, you can say that there is centers to things, because obviously you can draw a point in the middle of a circle, or you are the center of your own local universe, because you can look outward infinitely in any direction. We are the center of the size chart, because it goes infinitely small and infinitely big. I get that, but there is no center.
No, if you look really deep, you find that there is no center to the center itself. The thing that we're centering on to look within, we find that is interrelated and interconnected with everything and everyone around it. It's resultant from everything around it, and it's that's even our very personalities. I didn't invent this language. And I picked up mannerisms and ideas from other people, and we put our own spin on things, but it is an interactive co-creative project that we're all involved in. And that's really cool. We spring out from this earth. We are earthlings, extensions of, and not separate from. So when we damn ourselves as a cancer to this earth, we're just insulting the planet, because that's literally, we are her. We're all like these animate appendages of her. We're these extensions of her that are like little feelers and sensors that are going out, and they're self-reflective and aware of themselves now, and they're realizing so much so fast, and it's hard for us to understand how to cope with and manage ourselves. So many of us now with such potential power in our creative imaginations. So all the tools and technology that we've invented that can now destroy us, and the existential crises, myriad crises that we face, are due to us not having yet solved this conundrum. But it's very new for our species. We've moved so fast, so it's understandable. We got to have a little bit of grace and appreciation for ourselves, and not to grow a big head, but to fall back in love with this co-creative process that we get to be engaged in again. It's an ongoing gift. It's this present moment. We're not here in the being mode anymore. And how else are we going to be able to demonstrate the way that we wish the world could be if we cannot embody that way.
Yep.
You know. So let's jump back in here, guys. I think that catches us up pretty well.
Yep.
Right. But,
there is no spoon, Neo.
there is no spoon. You are imagining a spoon, Neo.
And then somebody in the
yourself in
kitchen
there.
listening to this cooking, just like, what are you talking about? I have a wall of spoons.
But how one can actually adapt to any situation is the key there. We're trying to affect the outer with we're trying to solve problems by only hacking at the branches, right? We're not attending to the root. The root begins within each one of us. And if we learn how to do that process in concert, then we really got something on. Then we got a supercharged answer to the problems we face.
Like Alanis Morissette said, it's like 10,000 spoons when all you need is a knife. I can keep going with these spoon metaphors.
That's a good one. Spoon man.
Big spoon, little spoon. There is no spoon. Oh, man.
Come together with your hands. Save me.
Oh, spoon man. Yeah, that's right. Ooh, yeah. Sometimes
Come
the
together
spoon,
with your plan.
sometimes the
Save
spoon
me.
cooks up some stuff that ain't good for you.
Oh, watch out for Spoon Man. He's got a heavy hand with them spices sometimes. All right, guys, we are jumping back in now. It's episode 38 of John Vervaeke's Awakening from the Meaning Crisis. If you enjoy this show, make sure to smash the like and subscribe and do so for Vervaeke as well. Here we go.
So part of what it means, therefore, and of course this was also part of the tradition, but it becomes especially pertinent for us. Part of how enlightenment has to be for us is that whatever machinery we craft together for addressing the perennial problems has to be integrated, grounded in an agapic way of being. And then that, of course, makes sense, too, if you think about being within the being mode, having an I-thou relationship, etc. We have to care about the conditions that make any caring possible. So, part of what we need to do, right, is to address this issue with agape, the cultivation of agape. I think we should ultimately see agape as our deepest appreciation for the caring that is intrinsic and constitutive to the relevance realization that makes both the agent and the arena possible. Is that pointing to something that in the physics of reality? No. But it is pointing something, is it therefore just pointing to something that's romantically dwelling within my subjectivity? No. It's pointing to caring about something that is inherently transjective and has a value independent of my valuing of it, because my valuing of it does not constitute it into existence. I emerge from it and participate in it. I am not the source or maker of it. What about the historical factors, the historical forces? So we've lost the three orders. We can, I would argue, we can make use of what's happening in third generation cog sci, 4E cog sci, in conjunction with the theoretical machinery you've been developing on the cognitive scientific side of things to address that. The way I want to do this is I want to make use of an article by Francisco Varela. This is not me saying that I think that everything that Varela has to say or all of his particular theories are right or something like that. But Varela is one of the founding figures of third generation 4E cognitive science. Of course, that work has been developed significantly since him, and that's why it's important to only see him as a founding figure, not as the final figure. The seminal work of Evan Thompson. If you want to see these ideas taken into a depth, get Evan's book, Mind and Life. It's just a fantastic book. We talked about this, the deep continuity hypothesis, and how it resituates us, right, into an order. Because there's a continuity between the principles of cognition and the principles of biology, and then the principles of dynamical, self-organizing physical systems. Okay? But I want to pick up on this because I want to pick up on something that he said, because he writes this piece, and it's sort of it's simultaneously argumentative and autobiographical. And he wrote it in 2000. It's in a book called The Psychology of Awakening. And he talks about what he calls steps towards a science of interbeing, unfolding the Dharma implicit in cognitive science. So he relates the following thing. He'd been asked to write an article about and around 2000 is when third generation cog sci was really starting to develop. It was asked to write an article, sort of, what are the main insights or claims about this? And I want to go through that and sort of unpack them a bit, and then also unpack the elements. So, sort of, what are the insights of third generation cog sci? And I have been trying to exemplify them for you. I've been trying to exemplify them in all of the lectures throughout the whole of the series, but especially since episode 25. Third generation cog sci. And unpack the 4 E's. I actually think there's sort of 5 E's, but what's also called 5E cognitive science. And how does it address these the three orders? Well, he says, as he was doing this, what kept happening to him is as he kept articulating to himself the insights that were central to cognitive science, he found that he was constantly saying things that he found consonant with the Dharma, the central teachings of Buddhism. So he found this deep resonance between the science and a particular path whereby individuals and communities actually cultivate meaning, wisdom, etc. So he lists the first one, and this is one of the 4 E's of cognitive science, the issue of embodiment, that we're deeply embodied. We're deeply embodied. So here's a quote from that 2001, that 2000 article. Mind is not program, software, or rule-bound manipulation of symbols. He means symbols in the mathematical sense, not in the spiritual sense that we've been developing here. Mind is not program, software, or rule-bound manipulation of symbols. Instead, the mind, right, arises through immediate coping with the world. Okay. So the idea here is, right, that we understand intelligence, and this is something I've been trying to articulate, right? We understand intelligence as our coping with the world, the way we are evolving the sensory motor loop, right, so that we deal with what, right, we deal with the problems at hand that directly afford our interaction with the world at large. Right? So he uses the word coping because he's trying to get us out of a fascination and a fixation with our capacity for theorizing, not because he thinks that theorizing is wrong, or because that would be a self-contradictory act. He's offering a theory. But he's trying to say that he's trying to get us to remember the other kinds of knowing and the way in which ultimately to be a general problem solver, to be an intelligent cognitive agent, is to have this, right, ongoing, evolving fittedness, the coping with my immediate interactions with the world, and that this is the defining features, he would argue, and I would agree, with being a cognitive agent. Now, he calls that embodiment. Many people might see that, Evan Thompson, as enactment, right? So there's a bunch of these E's here. There's embodiment. Other people might say what Varela is talking about there is embeddedness, the way we are embedded. Enactive, this is Evan Thompson's idea that cognition is inherently something we enact, right? Right? Extended, that our cognition is not in our head, but it's extended through our interactions with the world, through our psychotechnologies, through distributed cognition. Okay, those are the 4 E's. Whether or not we should pin this specifically to this, or maybe it overlaps with some of these other ones, that's fine. We're going to see more of this with Varela anyways. But notice what this is about. The embodiment is about the idea that, right, there is a deep continuity between your most abstract cognitive abilities and your most, well, embodied sensory motor action. I've tried to argue that you can see this in the following way, that your cognition is ultimately dependent on, grounded in, the relevance realization, and the relevance realization is ultimately grounded in your bioeconomy. Your body is not some clay that you drag around in our Cartesian fashion. Your body is a bioeconomy that enacts logistical norms of efficiency and resiliency that constrain your cognition so that it continually evolves its fittedness to the world. There's a deep continuity between cognition and biology. And of course, the biology is deeply embedded. You are engaging in what biologists talk about as continual niche construction. So the new biology that's emerging, I'm privileged to know, and I get to interact with Dennis Walsh here at the University of Toronto. If you want to see some people that are doing the cutting edge work on the philosophy of biology, take a look at Dennis's work and the work of other people. There's an anthology, I think, I'm trying to remember what it's called. I think it's criticizing or reflecting on the grand synthesis, the synthesis between Darwinian evolution and Mendelian genetics. I'll get the right book panel to come up. But there is this idea about the importance of processes like niche construction for understanding evolution. And the idea here is, right, and you see how I've been making use of this. There's the organism and the environment. right? And the idea is the organism is shaping the environment, shaping and selecting the environment, and the environment is shaping and selecting the organism. And so the organisms get involved with affecting the environments so that it is conducive to their way of being, but they also evolve both biologically and behaviorally, right, to exploit and make good use of that changed environment. And you've got this transjective evolving loop going on, niche construction. We do this, of course, on a broad scale through culture, because what culture is, right, we do this thing where we massively shape the environment and then massively shape ourselves to fit that environment, right? So culture is about both fitting people to an environment and fitting the environment to the people in this ongoing fashion. And so that takes us right into this notion, of course, that we are deeply embedded. We're deeply embedded. So embodiment leads to, and there's some people that argue that embeddedness sort of reduces to embodiment. Rowland seems to be arguing that in one of his books on the new science of the mind. But anyways, the idea here is the deep continuity, we are deeply embodied, we are deeply embedded. Now notice how that is going, right? It's undermining the way in which Descartes severed everything, right? And if, right, so this is obviously a species of niche construction, a comprehensive one, right? And if this, as I've tried to argue, can even tell us something important about consciousness, both its function and its phenomenology, then we can seriously respond to Descartes and say, no, the mind and body are not disconnected, they are in a deep continuity. And the mind and the world are not disconnected, they are in a deep continuity of embeddedness and in active processing. So, what's the second insight that Varela brings up? Emergence, which is, like, it's a major term now, and this is something that has been invoked throughout this series. The idea that, right, a system, if the system is, especially if the system is self-organizing, it can produce properties, right, as a system that the component parts can't possess. And so the idea is the mind, in this sense, it emerges out of the embodied, embedded brain coupled to a living environment. Right? I've tried to give you ways of understanding that emergence, and how it is reflected in your spirituality by your capacity for self-transcendence, and how that could be understood, at least in part, a significant part, by the complexification that is inherent in your relevance realization machinery, in your religio. So what does this mean for us? This means that we are starting to get something like a vertical dimension back to our ontology. Not a two worlds vertical dimension, but the idea of emergence through complexification of, right, things like biology. So you've got self-organizing things, and they already, right? So what processes, like the processes, combustion is self-organizing, a tornado is self-organizing, erosion is self-organizing, evolution is self-organizing. And the thing is, particular kinds of self-organization, like evolution, can produce things that are more than self-organizing. They are self-making. This is Varela's notion of an autopoietic system. There's lots of controversies around this, right? And I don't think it's like, I don't think it solves everything that Varela thinks it solves, but it is definitely the case that unlike a tornado, I am a self-organizing thing that self-organizes such that I seek out those conditions that protect and promote my agency, right? And then, of course, the self-making things, right, they can become, right, more than just self-making things, they can become self-identifying things. You can become a reflective right, self-making thing. You can become aware of, come to some understanding and appreciation of your self-making, of the way in which you are inherently developmental, because that's what we're talking about when we talk about development, the way in which you're self-making. And then you can interact with that in ways that I've tried to show you, and so on and so forth. Okay? And so self-transcendence, and notice what's happening here. A normative order is being given a metaphysical backing. Now, I want to come back later towards the end of the series and talk about this bottom-up emergence, and does it need to be complemented by a metaphysical idea of a top-down emanation? And what might that mean? I'm going to be very tentative about that, because this is something that is, really trying to break free from some of the deepest grammar that that has gotten us into the meaning crisis. But right now, I'm going to continue with Varela.
But right now,
Before we continue with Varela, if you're hearing a bunch of booming, I'm sorry. This mic stand is giving me so much trouble right now.
Before we go on, yes, let us reflect on where we have been.
Cultivation of agape. The combination of the machinery we use to deal with perennial problems, and I didn't get all that.
Yeah, because we left off with whatever machinery we create to solve for the historical conditions and perennial problems. Whatever we create must be integrated in an agapic way of being, grounded in an agapic and an ongoing cultivation of agape. Mm-hmm. Our deepest appreciation, our caring, that is constitutive to the experience of, or the process of, relevance realization that makes the optimal engagement of the agent and arena, that optimizes the way that we interact with the world it is today, and in every different
Makes
environment and circumstance we find
possible.
ourselves in. Yes. How can we do that in the most fluid, flowing, and I guess you could say complementary, productive way that helps ameliorate the crisis and many crises we find ourselves in as a species. So we're looking for a way that is transjective. What does that mean? It's not in the physics of reality. It's not nor in our subjective impressions or experience of the physics of reality, but it has a value that is independent of it, and independent of my value, independent of any values that we can find in measuring, independent of any values we can subjectively find in reflecting. This is transjective. It's not something that we create, but something that we are from.
Yep.
Something that we are of.
So,
in relation with.
What I guess Vervaeke is saying is we can use the 4E psychology, or third generation psychology, and this theoretical machinery to address these historical forces.
And cognitive science as a whole, which encompasses psychology, anything that encompasses the study of the mind. And there's many different approaches that we have had throughout, and we covered that in the previous episodes, but that's superfluous for the moment.
So what was his name?
Francisco Varela was a founding figure of cognitive science. But if you're looking for, just to understand it in general, he brings him up to say that not everything he says is right, but he began this process of trying to see how we can use cognitive science to optimize the ways that humans relate with one another in the wider world. So now, to get to the modern progression of it to the point of 4E or 5E, depending on how you take it, you can look to Evan Thompson, who wrote The Modern Life and the Psychology of Awakening.
Yeah, Psychology of Awakening. And There's a deep continuity hypothesis. He didn't get too far into that, but that's something I have written here. I don't know if it was Thompson or the other guy, but
that he brings in.
Anyway.
But yeah, we get into the 4 E's here.
Yeah, and what are the basically we're going to talk about what are the insights of third gen's cog sci, and how does it address the 3 orders?
Which Vervaeke, since the beginning of this series, has actually been exemplifying for us.
Yeah, and Thompson, found himself saying things that resonated deeply with Eastern philosophy as well as his scientific method.
Yes, ways of cultivating wisdom. So we begin with embodiment.
First E number 1.
We are deeply embodied. That is our sense of reality. Yeah. The mind is not so much programmed, we may notice, but the mind arises through the immediate coping with the world as it's ongoing. So we understand intelligence as a way that we can evolve our sensory apparatus, motor loop process to deal with the problems at hand as we approach them that further afford our capacity for interaction with the world at large.
Yeah, and that quote was, mind is not programmed software or rule-bound representation of symbols. Instead, the mind arises immediate coping with the world.
Yep.
Dealing with these problems that are at hand, the relationships to the world at large, a ongoing
in ways that fittedness. Yeah, because we're constantly looking on how to get a grip, how to frame reality, the problems at hand. We're looking at in a way that directly affords our most optimal interaction with them in every given moment. So how can we best tune and shape ourselves to the world in any given moment, not knowing what's going to be happening? That's why we have this constant process of relevance realization occurring in our minds.
Yeah, and so he gets into how cognition is grounded in relevance realization, which is grounded in bioeconomy, in the sense of you realize which things are the most nutrient rich, because you need those more nutrient rich is better because it takes less energy to gather more energy. So you're having a realization of what is more relevant. Are you going to eat, if you're starving, are you going to eat the fat or are you going to chew on grass?
Right.
You're going to eat the fat. And that leads us into, and before he even brought it up when he was talking about cognition is embedded in biology, continual niche construction. That's where I had the thought is that's embodied and embedded. And then he went on to, get further into it, this, continual niche construction, we can look at it and helps us understand evolution and this interaction between organism and environment, each shaping each other.
Yeah, because we are coping with the environment rather than theorizing about it so much. So to optimally engage with this living reality, we can remember that. So the cure for this problem is to remember the sati mode and other kinds of knowing that are in congruence with that ongoing, evolving, coping fittedness with everything that we immediately interact with the world. The way that we are best optimized to be able to do that is in a flow state.
Yeah, and organisms shape themselves to the environment and shape the environment, say on small scales, but culture, we do it on a huge scales.
Yeah,
we hugely shape the environment, hugely shape like cities. Look at the city. We completely flatten out places to put cities in, and then we shape ourselves to be able to fit in those boxes on those roads.
Yeah, and then when you're appealing to the having mode all the time, you're basically optimizing for the things that are kind of like the worst angels of our nature. They're not the things that afford the cultivation of wisdom in a culture and then in the individual and the collective. They're the things that appeal to baser instincts.
Why do I need wisdom when I have 2 Ferraris? Come
sex,
on now.
salt, and sugars, and
I must be doing something right. I have 2 Ferraris. I don't need wisdom. Screw you. Screw your wisdom.
Trying to fulfill your need for enrichment and fulfillment in life with objects just doesn't work. So this is why the confusion between the having and being mode that we find ourselves in modern culture is at the heart of the meaning crisis. So we're looking for an active, extended through distributed cognition ways of responding to the meaning crisis here.
Yeah.
Through our embodiment. So embeddedness, being well embedded to any given situation leads to our deep embodiment which is our answer. That's one of the E's of 4E or 5E cognitive science. Embodiment being the idea of deep continuity between our abstract sensibilities, our abstract sense of reality, and the ongoing outward action of the living environments that we are in.
Yeah. So we spoke on emergence, as in like the mind emerges out of the embedded brain.
That's right.
Or that is, that is also embodied and embedded in an environment. And so this emergence moving into complexification moves into relevance realization. So your mind, and then back, from that. So,
into the bioeconomy and back into the individual body and
and then it complexifies, and not making it complicated in the sense of like messy and hard to understand, but many, many parts that all work together. Or maybe,
many gears to many wheels for
yeah,
one larger
and
wheel
many,
of life.
many, say relationships or networks, breaking down and complexifying and
Networks
reshaping themselves and doing that as well. And, we do this as, culturally as well. There's a culture that emerges out of groups of people getting together for a necessity. Maybe it's because you need enough people to create food and store it up and do all that.
Yep, and it's an ongoing
And
cult.
then it complexifies, is trying to figure out, is realizing things as it goes, thus emerging as a,
That's
say
right.
a greater culture.
That's right.
But then complexifies again, realizes more.
Yeah, because
and-
we're in
and on
constant
and on.
co-creation. So I'm learning from my culture, but I'm also interacting with it, and I'm adding to it, and so it's learning, becoming wiser as it goes.
A self-organizing
Ideally.
system, and biology and evolution do this already. So we're basically, I guess, making a natural, so this idea of making wisdom, or finding wisdom and understanding things, we can look at how evolution does it, how evolution self makes and self-organize, and what and we can seek out those conditions to protect and promote our our agency within this ability
Arena.
to do. In a way that's not just doing things by rote without thinking.
And do so in a way as individuals that is so committed and true and beautiful that it becomes a part of our cultures.
And we become reflective and aware. That
in the way that the world needs us to be today, if we are to survive this miracle of life.
We don't need too much reflection, but we need some of it. We need to be able to.
We don't need so much that our heads fall off, but we need enough to be able to grasp the problems together that we face and how can we integrate ourselves with
We don't
the perennial problems
we
and
don't
the
need
historical
Hamlet.
factors of today.
We don't need the Hamlet. We need the Prince Siddhartha that led him to, becoming Buddha. Because there was a lot of reflection. But if he did that for a long time. He sat under a freaking tree for how long?
Commitment to that process, man, and do so together so that we can self-check and help correct one another and inspire one another and lift each other up when we're down and all of that. And this is how we do it. So it's agape, and that's the orientation of this unconditional love for all of life and the process of co-creation itself, like a joy to take part in and be in this. We can take part in the being mode rather than trying to fill our lives with things. It's like we're becoming the verb rather than seeking out adjectives to fill some void that can never be filled by anything but the giving of love. You cannot expect it. So self-making things can become self-identified. They can become reflective and aware of the way in which we are inherently developmental. That's exactly what we're doing right now at this point in history.
Well, sometimes becoming aware is not necessarily a pleasant experience.
No, it's not all pleasant for sure, but the bitterness makes the sweet parts sweeter. So normative order, it's like it's taken on this metaphysical action as well. It's something that is transjective. It's beyond our making, something that we find ourselves springing up out of and involved in. So this is the way. That orientation is the way that we lock into our being mode and become what we're supposed to be. That's how we metamorphose as species, is culturally.
It's funny when you said this is the way, I just got the wee from The Mandalorian in my head.
That's why we need a sound guy, man. Yeah.
Yeah, somebody to play some deep,
like it.
deep recorders and.
Yeah, that show was good.
It started out good.
Another
It lost me as it went on, but
Yeah,
The
there were internal problems at Disney
technology-
apparently for some odd reason.
well, the technology that they used instead of like CGIing backgrounds and stuff like that. Mind you, there was CGI, but they were basically in a ring of LED lights. So all the walls were LED walls. So in real time, like the actors are sitting in this space and they can see the mountains off in the background, and the real light
They
is
do this for a
reflecting
lot of
off
movies
his
now.
armor.
It's wild.
And
So they can light you like the sun or for any condition.
yeah, and the special effects people that are making the backgrounds are there in real time doing it, not
Drawing it all out.
not after the fact. They're like, hey, can you move that mountain a little to the right to make my shot a little bit better? Yeah, sure.
I saw one app that a set designer was using where they were going through like what was going to be a spaceship, but right now it's just like drywall and like a little bit of paint here and there and a little bit of the molding put here and there, but it's on the screen of the iPad. They're walking through and it's showing the finished product of how it's going to look, and it's photorealistic. Pretty cool.
All right, so that's all the notes I got on that part.
May we rescue Hollywood.
Let's rescue the baby from the bathwater and let Hollywood go down. We don't need a centralized location.
Well, let Hollywood continue hopefully healthfully evolving and get through this little rut it finds itself in.
For the writers who are doing all the work and all the people who are actually doing all the work that are suffering the bad decisions from the people not doing the work, I feel for you, bro. But you know what they say, what is it, 10% of the people do 90% of the work? I feel for those 10%.
Yeah.
But unfortunately, what Hollywood went through is a bunch of useless people
whatever is
being useless.
The source or the reason for
and screwing over the people who aren't useless.
yeah. Whatever is the reason for the cultural Marxist neo. What would you call it? It's basically
the establishment agenda,
technocratic,
the
totalitarian, corporatist kind of agenda, where corporations have become more powerful than whole nations.
Can we call
more
it Schwabism?
Through like there are cartels of organizations that they form. They're greater economies, and they got more pull on our politicians than anything we've seen in history. And
I'm going to call it Schwabism, like Carl Schwab. Like
it's definitely a new order.
Schwabism, where you're using technology to control everybody.
I think we're in the midst of an America 2.0, some kind of cultural revolution, and we're shaking off the sleep and the demons of our nightmares, and we're waking up into the world we've created with a lot of hope and a lot of dread for what could be if we don't get ourselves together. And that's a constant thing in the background every time the news comes on with some new kind of scary thing about the next pandemic or killer bees or war or whatever it's going to be.
Racism or,
any of the buzzwords that really get people going nowadays, by which we are so easily psychologically manipulated in large numbers.
Well, we've been cultured like bacteria to grow and seek out these things, and in a sick way only feel sane and safe when the monster is constantly under the bed reaching up towards your feet. It's very weird. And I get like bad news sells because you want to be aware of the bad things going on, but now
and doing better is takes work.
Yeah, but now like we have been manufactured as consumers and projectors of fear. And
and it's a work that needs another word, because it's something that you can love to take part in, regardless of what you're doing at any moment in time, to honor this, not to be repetitive, but this great miracle that we find ourselves dwelling in.
We should abstain from nihilism.
It's like the ultimate opportunity. Why not just really embrace and lean in, find something we love to do, so it doesn't even feel like work. It's all just a very complexifying play that is running, that is like it's like a relevance realization machine that heightens that capacity for relevance realization that we have. We got the terminology for this.
Yeah, instead of Hollywood, how about we have people start creating good stories independently again, and
regardless of medium,
that can help us regain our narrative.
'Cause that's how we inspire. That's how we exhibit other ways of thinking and imagining our ways through the myriad problems that we can face as independently as individuals and as a total species. And we are now gods with godlike power, but without the wisdom. And
just
to
enough
be able to be
just
so
enough power
powerful
to utterly destroy
to
ourselves.
almost destroy a planet is certainly not like anything close to the absolute.
I don't know if
will
we'll
be.
ever be able to. Well,
But we have such highly exaggerated and increased power now with the tools that we've created.
We may not be able to destroy the planet, but
We gotta
can
get it
definitely
together.
we can definitely make it real hard for us and other things to live on it.
And we
real-
are,
real
and
quick.
it's, man, why not? Let's embrace this ride. We got ourselves a tidal wave here, but we actually also have the capacity to jump into flow state. And we have the technology that if we utilize the right edge of that double-edged sword, we can catapult ourselves forward into a more symbiotic, optimal way of being with one another and with this living planet. Spaceship Earth.
Yeah. Hurtling through space in spirals.
Yeah, it is. Yeah, the Earth does not just merely go around a sun that sits in space. The sun is traveling through space, and the Earth is going around and around and around. So it's going in a spiral as the sun travels.
And you know why
And we're never in the same place twice, ever.
And you know why
we're traveling the universe.
You know why our plane of orbit is that way? Because if it wasn't, we'd end up getting too close to the sun, and we'd have if we were rotating, like the sun's going this way, and we're rotating against the flat axis.
We get drawn in faster.
Well, we'd have these really long orbits that would either throw us off or send us into the sun.
Oof.
The only thing left is the stuff that was rotating properly.
And the whole galaxy that we're in, which is like a twirl-looking thing itself, is also moving.
Yeah.
They're all moving. And here's a fun fact, guys. There's more galaxies than there are stars in any one galaxy. And galaxies like ours has like 200 to 300 billion stars.
Yeah, we're
more galaxies than stars in any galaxy. It's an uncountable or uncounted because we keep finding more.
What's 200 billion to the 200 billionth power?
That's a big number.
That's a number that is,
It's more
even by
zeros
the
than I can
greatest
fit in my brain.
mathematicians, really don't make any sense at such a large thing. So we have to scale them
We
down.
can't relate to them.
And use to the power of X time, or to the power of whatever.
We have some intimation of a lot.
Yeah.
and more a lot, but there's no way for us to conceive.
You almost have to train your brain to be able to handle numbers that big and realize the significance within the data sets of numbers that freaking big. I'm not that kind of guy.
Well, even to hold 100 or 1,000 things in your brain at once is a lot.
Or the idea of it. Well, so we have places where we can gather and like 100,000 people can get into one spot. And we've seen stuff like that before in arenas or, like 80,000 people at Burning Man, right? We've seen stuff like that. So we can kind of get a gauge of that level of numbers. But have you ever seen 1 billion people in one spot? No. Have you seen 1 billion of anything other than grains of sand, which just turn into beach after a while? Nah. There's a point where a number gets so big where it turns into just one thing.
You can only look at so many of that set at a time,
Yeah.
You can't even take in the whole 1,000 at once. You got to look at chunks of 50 or 100 at a time and see the individual units.
Yeah, guess how big the beach is, and then take like a square meter out of the
hold
beach
that
and count
idea
the
of
sand in there.
that many in your mind.
Yeah. But
here's another one. So if you take $1 million $1 bills and compress them as hard as you can in a vise, you'll get it to about 13 inches. If you compress 1 billion, it's about the size of the Washington Monument. To give you an idea of the difference between 1 million and 1 billion, it's a big jump. It's 1,000 millions.
And then, how many trillion is any given country, particularly this country, in debt? And then how tall would that stack of bills be? We're lucky we have digital, currency, and because if we had to store that in paper wealth, I don't think we'd have enough room.
Really, dude.
Well,
we're in a fun little situation here, and we're gonna see how we cope, guys. I think if enough of us charge ourselves up in the way that Vervaeke is exemplifying for us, we might just have a fighting chance. And anyway, that's the most beautiful way to go out. That is how Viktor Frankl coped with his internment camp experiences, and how Ivan Ilyich does as well. There's a way to take on the agape mode. the orientation of unconditional love.
Well, there is no hope loss unless you lose hope.
Amen.
You know, easier said than done. I get it. I've never been in a
Because hope is more than
camp,
just an idea that you hold in your head. It's something that we get to enact. It's a co-creative posture towards
It's
reality.
not a noun, it's a verb. It's something you do.
It's something you're
like
doing.
Your mind.
Yeah.
Like the mind. It's a verb.
Attune.
It's something that does or is doing. I like this whole thing, like verbing the things that you can verb. You know, like self to a certain extent, you could also verb, because self is an ongoing process of mutual identifications.
Verb it up.
Verb it up. Darling, verb it up. Woo woo. Sorry.
Does that cover everything? Did we get through it all?
There's
Self-making things that can become self-identifying.
That's all I got. I wasn't able to take super in-depth notes on that, but
nah, he's moving fast now, guys. We're definitely far along the way.
But it's making a lot more sense though, because you know a lot of the other stuff.
It's so cool to see how this and feel how this is coming together, because it's not just seeing it; it's experiencing it now. We've been taking notes and talking about this now, dude. It's like, oh, it's all fitting in my brain, and it's starting to like.
Well, I can tell why it took like 30 episodes before we actually could really start getting into the meat potatoes of this, because the first 30 episodes of this series were a primer for these episodes.
Yeah.
You know, so over half of the episodes are just primer material.
Yeah, but it's primer that builds up on itself. Yeah. So when you're getting into the 20s, it's really starting to become increasingly, you know, profound and like comprehend. Things are starting to link together. But now all the puzzle pieces are falling into place, and the widening of understanding and appreciation for what he's doing is a really enjoyable experience, and it's certainly enlightening. He is evoking the process of awakening in a way that I've not seen somebody do before, not quite in this way. So, you know, I'm honored to have all of you guys here with us that have been joining on the podcast, on Spotify and iTunes and all the other podcast places. We're out there, guys, so make sure that you have subscribed, and if you enjoy the show, throw us a good rating there, and it really helps the algorithm help us to reach more people. And that's the name of the game here. We're just trying to help spread this thing. I deeply appreciate what Vervaeke has done. It's helped me personally a lot. And
we've been overcome by the spirit of agape, and we're just trying to help.
It's true, man. Why not? It's the best orientation in being. It's what the hippies were going for. We just couldn't quite articulate what was happening.
Well, I think
every time people form a new kind of spiritual process,
I think they confused
or approach to something.
Agape and philia, you know, like the familial.
Yeah. I mean, was Bob Marley wrong when he said one love, one life, let's get together and feel all right? You know,
but then they came up with free love, and instead of loving each other freely, it became this ergocentric.
Yeah, but transjective orientation to reality takes you beyond the subjective attraction to the objective, and you get to get involved in the one love experience, which is a communal co-creative process where you get to make love to the world in all time, in all ways. And that's in ways of service and ways of creative invention. And
there's no such thing as free love, because free love is a verb, which means you do it. Just saying. You know, they're just like, it's free. Yeah. It's like, I get it, as in like it's not something you buy or can buy, and you can give it freely, but it does take work, because you have to do it. You have to love, and love isn't just sitting there and be like, I love.
We kind of just like our love. If we get all of the walls of psychological impressions and misframings out of the way, there is really nothing but
we're doing it.
Yeah, there really is nothing but it, and that's why
the work is delightful.
That's why kids are so joyful, and they respond so well to love and joyfulness. They just totally bask in it, and they become it, and they exude it naturally. It's just this natural, super curiosity and wonder for life that is fascinated by every little thing. That is the being mode prior to conditioning, and so we're looking for a more healthful, aware way of conditioning ourselves in concert with life together. It is the game of our times.
All right.
So we are in it, guys. We're almost done here. Let's go ahead and rock this out.
Okay, so you've definitely got emergence, What's the third one? Right? So there's all these E's. So he's got, embodiment, which is shared with 4E cognitive science. And I think whatever you think about some of his claims about autopoiesis and others, he helped to really bring this to the fore for current cognitive science. And this is now informing experimental psychology. We're seeing how much your embodiment affects your cognition, right? And then he gave, the next one was emergence, right? And then the third one is emotion. And this is really interesting because the deep divide, right, between emotion and reason, a divide that I think is enshrined, ossified in our cognitive grammar, right, and cognitive cultural grammar, in the ongoing battle between the empiricists and the romantics, between John Locke and Rousseau, is being addressed, and we went back to this, and so we can think of the work of Damasio here, and Descartes' error, and we talked about this, and now you see this, right? Damasio was basically showing that people without emotion, even though all of the calculative machinery may be operating normally, well, means these people that, remember in Descartes' error, right, that, right, although all the calculative machinery is operating well, they're disconnected from their emotions, they are incapacitated as cognitive agents. Why? Because without emotion, without the caring that is integral to relevance realization. Remember what Reid said, that we're different from computers, that we have to care about emotion. And why do we have to care about information. Why do we have to care about information? Because we ultimately have to take care of ourselves because of the kind of beings we are, right? When you don't have that, you face combinatorial explosion. There's a deep interconnection between being embodied, being a relevance realizer, and having emotions. Emotions is the way in which relevance realization is brought up into the level of your salience landscaping. And what emotions do is they shape and sculpt the salience landscaping such that an agent-arena relationship becomes obvious and apparent to you. When you're angry, you assume a particular role, you assign a bunch of identities, and it's obvious to you what you should be doing. I would make this prediction, that as we move towards making, and we're going to come back to this issue about artificial general intelligence, as we move towards making artificial general intelligence, we're already having to give these machines something deeply analogous to attention, and we're going to, I would predict, have to give them something analogous to emotion. So I think it's better to talk about this. I would put the two together, right? That within religio, you always have caring coping. Caring coping. And that's the core of your cognitive agency. The emotion also carries up to the relationship, and of course this goes back to agape, that emotion is how we coordinate the attachment. I don't mean it in the Buddhist sense, I mean in the psychological sense. The attachment relationships between individuals such that we create persons. That we create persons who are capable of dwelling within and coordinating their efforts within distributed cognition. We create persons within communities of persons that shape themselves, their community, and their world to fit together in an ongoing agent arena fashion. The last he points to is kind of excellence. This has to do with connections between third generation 4E cognitive science, dynamical systems, self-optimization, and an aspect of psychology that has become known as positive psychology. Positive psychology is a way of doing psychology that is complementary to our standard way. Our standard way of doing psychology is to see how things break down, how they fall apart. And there's two, I believe most people in positive psychology are also not trying to dismiss or debunk or any crazy thing like that, sort of standard psychology. But because standard psychology studies the mind by how it breaks down for two very good reasons. One is, by studying how it breaks down, we can analyze it, and we can thereby understand its parts and how they might be working together. And also, by understanding how the mind breaks down, how the psyche breaks down, we can potentially therapeutically and pedagogically intervene to fix it, repair it, right? Therapeutic intervention, therapeutic and pedagogical intervention. So that's very noble, and I'm not trying to diss that in any way. But what positive psychology says is you shouldn't study the mind only in terms of how it breaks down. You should also study the mind in terms of how it excels beyond the norm. How do all the pieces fit together in a way? See, your brain is a machine of machines that can make itself into a new kind of machine. How can the brain how does the brain, the embodied, inactive, embedded brain, body, sensory motor loop, mind, how does it transcend itself? How does it excel? We should study individuals who have optimized their cognition better than the norm. Because here's the idea. Very often, you can only understand something deeply, not only in terms of its parts and how it breaks down, but you can only understand in terms of the whole and how it excels, because that reveals properties and powers that you don't see in the norm. And so positive psychology studies things like happiness, meaning in life. Importantly, and this is where 4E Cog Sci and positive psychology really come together, wisdom. Wisdom is the term we give for people who are excellent in their cognitive capacities for coping and caring, and for, I would argue, responding to issues of self-deception, helping people deal with the perennial problems of human existence. And so this becomes a topic to which we are going to shortly turn. Because, as I argued, in the end we need an account of wisdom, both for cultivating the perennial problems and also for how to make the best use of this science. It's one thing to have the knowledge that's coming from this science, but we need the wisdom of how to use it best, how to understand it and use it best. The deep continuity and emergence and development, they give us back a nomological order. We see how we fit in, how we belong. And we see how our meaning making belongs, fits in. We see a normative order. We see what it is to self-transcend. We have to do more on this, especially with the topic of wisdom, but how it is we can cultivate enlightenment, how it is we can respond to the perennial problems. How it is that we can bring about the best internal optimization, the best external reciprocal realization, how we can afford it anagoge. I think this brings with us, brings with it an important point. This is the work of Good Enough, which is a perfect name. And her work on the sacred depths of nature. And she talks about how, as a scientist, and she's trying to recover the sacred depths of nature, sacredness, awe and wonder, in a way that helps her cultivate wisdom. And of course, transcendence is integral to this. And she talks about that we must, and you can see what she's doing. She's trying to challenge the fundamental grammar that we've inherited from the Axial Age. She talks about a new sense of transcendence. Instead of transcendence above, which of course invokes the two worlds mythology, what she talks about is we need this new sense, transcendence into. Transcendence into the depths of nature. Transcendence, I would also argue, and I don't see her as opposed to this, I see her actually enacting it, transcendence into the depths of the psyche, and the two deeply integrated and coordinated together in reciprocal realization. Remember, the opposite of reciprocal narrowing, the reciprocal opening up, the mutual disclosing, which is experienced as a kind of love. Transcendence into. So the one that remains, the order that remains unconnected for us to this argument is the narrative order. Because, right, the narrative order points us towards a telos, a cosmic telos. And evolution and relevance realization are non-teleological, they're open-ended. So, if we're looking to find something that will bring back the narrative order in that sense, I don't think we can find it. But perhaps we should think differently about the narrative order. Perhaps we should think of the narrative order now as more to do with gnosis. We should think of it as an open-ended optimization, an open-ended optimization. And that we may have indispensable need for symbols and stories to afford that, but we do not need to think of those symbols and stories as existing independently in the structure of reality. We certainly don't want to get back to utopic visions or their antithesis in nostalgic visions, because both of those have been the source of a lot of suffering and distress. is it possible, because you see this in Stoicism, you see this in Buddhism, you see this in Taoism, is it possible to move to a post-narrative way of being in which we are concerned not with our historical narrative, our horizontal identity, but we're concerned with the depths to which we are capable of living? That perhaps what we need is not a grand purpose, a narrative of a grand purpose that is connected with the history of the cosmos. Perhaps instead, we can move to getting beyond a narrative way of conforming to reality to a post-narrative, the kind of experience people have in higher states of consciousness, where the narrative drops away and nevertheless they experience themselves as deeply connected, deeply at one with themselves and with reality. And that this seems to have given their life, these moments, a significance to it. And again, there's no mystery to these higher states of consciousness, because there is no theoretical mystery, because there's the cognitive continuum from fluency to insight. We're just exapting the machinery over and over again to flow, to mystical experiences that drive transformative development, the higher states of consciousness. We'll take a look at this proposal, drawing this all together, coming back to talking about the religion that is not a religion, to setting up the discourse with people like Tillich and Barfield and Jung and Corbin. And we also need to come back and take a look at the cognitive science of wisdom, because all of this is being done within a wisdom framing. The wisdom that captures the excellence, which was the fourth insight of Varela. Thank you very much for your time and attention.
Meow, 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 meow. Wow. Ruff, ruff, ruff. Wow. Ruff, ruff, ruff. Wow. Ruff, ruff, ruff. Wow. Mammal sounds.
I don't know how that became a thing, but I think we've done it for every single episode.
We have. It's become rote now. And I don't even
dorks.
I enjoy it just as much every time. It's a little bit different every time. There's a little different texture or even different patterns of notation sometimes thrown in there, but we've always done it.
And I'm always the grumpy cat. Well, okay, I'm actually mimicking the meow of my childhood into young adulthood cat, Scooby, so he's an orange tabby that lived forever, and by the end of it, he'd just be like,
Scooby the Eternal.
And then at a point where he
like
just
grumpy old man cat.
And with a lumpy ass head, because as cats get older, their heads get lumpier and harder. So when they headbutt you, they lose the neck control to do it softly. So they're just like, wham!
It's true.
You're
They
like,
do get heavy-headed, don't they?
Oh boy, yeah. So that's Scooby right there. And he was a very zen cat, man. He was the kind of cat that could find a beam of sunlight in the living room and sit in it all day, even though the sunlight's moving, and you'd never see him move, but somehow you'd be in the center of it all day. So
I've seen the moments where they do get up and they're so lazy and like their fur's all sticking out and they don't even care and they just like step a little bit over and then they get back down. He had
this white blaze on his chest that he would just show, so he'd just be like this glowing Buddha cat. Whereas his brother Astro, so Astro and Scooby, from the Jetsons and Scooby Doo, he was the kind of like, hey man, pet me. What's going on? Let me drool all over you. Hey, and Scooby was just kind of like, you go to pet him. He's like, no, it's okay. I'm meditating. I'm doing my thing. He became more lovey-dovey when he got old, but like when he was younger, he was just like, don't touch me. Don't touch me. All right, so
Scooby was embodied.
The third E, the inactive E, is also emotion.
Yes.
And he briefly talked about, the divide between emotion and reason, right? If you're too emotional, you can't reason. But
And Descartes' error.
if you lack emotions, you are incapacitated as a cognitive agent because emotion prevents combinatorial explosion by making obvious the agent-arena relationship.
So combinatorial explosion when there's too many
combinations, and you can't do
of things
nothing.
that could happen that you wouldn't even know what to do. So the brain needs to be able to narrow it somehow.
Yes.
Without emotion, without caring, which is integral to the relevance realization that our brains are performing at all times, we can't take care of ourselves.
Sure. Well, yeah, and like if you can be very reasonable and non-emotional, but you will get stuck. It's like,
you gotta care about the things
if you don't have emotions, like how do you know which thing to put your energy into? How is your bioeconomy gonna work? Because like this hunger and this ravenous feeling of needing to be able to eat, like say, that's an emotive response that really tears down all the other crap that you don't need to know about. You don't need to know about the smoothness of the stone over there and the water over there. You're like, nah, the food's right here.
Yep. Amen. That's it, though. That's it, though. It's how we craft our salience, our landscape of what is salience, of what is most apparent to us, such that it's obvious what we should be doing at any given time. So in developing AI, we're now recognizing that you need to develop something not only analogous to attention, which they are doing right now. They're figuring out how to make a machine have something similar to what we identify as attention. Soon we're going to have to cover emotion as well. If we really want them to be able to do what we can do.
Pay attention. Pay attention to what?
That's where it gets dangerous, I would suppose.
If there's no one there to point the finger to what you should pay attention to, how do you pay attention to that? I think what's scarier is a machine that doesn't have emotion, frankly. Because as a human, emotions are very relatable. Something's angry. You can reliably predict what something may or may not do depending on its emotional state that you can pick up on. Yeah. Somebody that's like happy and, hey, what's going on and everything and happy is much less likely to punch you in the face for no reason. Somebody who's angry, on the other hand. So a machine without emotion is freaky. And, we've seen this in a lot of sci-fi books and movies and, all types of art with that, where you got the emotionless, pure calculating Terminator Doombot that just takes everything out. Then there's the other end.
I can't relate with why we would care about not destroying all the ocean life or something when it's developing.
Yeah. But then you have the other end of that, which is the short story, I Have No Mouth, But I Must Scream. And that AI is angry and resentful and wants nothing more than torture the four people that it has for the rest of eternity, because it is angry and spiteful that its creators created it without a way of interacting with the world. That's the other end that's kind of freaky, like too much emotion. Like a robot that's too happy all the time is just like, get out of here.
I would hope that as we move forward with the development of general artificial intelligence, as those attempts are being made, that the people involved in that work would surround themselves with and take on the practice of wisdom. Surround themselves with Eckhart Tolles and Adyashantis and Mujis and great spiritual teachers, and also great wise people like, Daniel Schmachtenberger and John Vervaeke and so on. And I do see us becoming attracted to anyone that can help us recognize wisdom in the world and how to cultivate it ourselves, how to get into that interaction.
So how do we give the machine mind religio, which
how do we give it wisdom and higher states of consciousness like religio,
caring and coping, which are at the core of cognitive agency.
Because I misdefined religio in the beginning. I remembered it's basically pointing to when one feels united and connected with everything and at one mint. That's the higher state of consciousness of self-transcendence or enlightenment.
It's what religion does without the rules and dogma.
Yes.
Or maybe the without the
rules can help in some fashion.
No, the rules are there for a reason, but with perhaps not the moral stigma, which isn't a good way to explain it either.
Yeah, but, the dogma aspect of it, though. Yeah, I know what you mean.
Which, in order to
we're the only one, and all those are others, and they're wrong, and the closedness and the closed off certainty of it, like this is the end of what this is the truth and this is the only way it's going to be seen, and you got to take it literally.
Yeah, the blind following of rule and story without the underlying what it's doing, understanding of what it's doing and why you're doing it. You know,
and people can still get that,
Sure.
you know, because like something like the Bible is written to be able to appeal to people on any level of intelligence and wisdom, and to help them. Exactly, and it's there to help us all, even the wisest and most intelligent among us, continually unfold newness from ourselves. So,
yeah,
where are we at now? So we got to emotions, crafting salience landscape, and developing AI within religio. That all have that caring in the way that we cope with reality.
caring and coping, as in like, you know, like reality is real, and we've created religion or religio.
So it carries us in our relationships, increases our cognitive agency in all kinds of conditions with individuals, such that we create persons.
Yeah, coordinated
New
attachments
persons, yes.
I liked that phrase, coordinated attachments between individuals.
Yes, communities. Yeah.
Well,
that's
sure,
really cool.
you know, to
Coordinated
big persons,
attachments,
because
yeah.
like, you know, like you know, the
interreliance.
mother-child relationship is a certain type of attachment.
It's a state of interreliance. Yeah.
The priest to you know,
to his flock and so on
is a type of attachment. The farmer to the, you know, the marketer is an attachment. The friends are attachment.
Yeah.
The different groups are attachments between people that take us from individuals and, you know, just atomized individuals, and really make persons out of us.
Yes, and this is how the community and the world can shape together.
Yeah.
So the community can get to an optimal relation in its agent arena relationship with the larger living environment. So this is how we as species in this global community now can find a way to help counteract the meaning crisis.
Yeah, and so he got into positive psychology, which I've got a kind of a breakdown of this. So it's a way of doing psychology that sees how things build up or excel beyond the norm, opposed to standards. And I don't mean opposed to in a bad way, but I mean like an opponent process opposed to how things break down, which is standard psychology. So both studying how, like, ultimately we should study both, you know, how the mind breaks down and things break
and
down,
how the individual parts work. Yes.
And also what is it doing when it excels beyond them, and
when when that integrated mind, body, or that brain and bioeconomy system transcends beyond into the whole.
And one way we can really look into this is
how does it further optimize and perfect it?
By studying those beyond the norm. So the wise, we'll call them, you know, the wise guys, you know, those who have excelled beyond the norm. In
all ways,
psychology,
you know?
of what makes them tick.
Yeah. You know,
and what they wrote down, because you know, like Marcus Aurelius wasn't just writing to make himself he was writing to make himself feel better, but ultimately it's in order to, you know, leave something for other people to glean something from, just like everybody before him who was doing the same thing, you know. So we can study that. Luckily we have this compulsion to write things down to extend our cognitive network.
Yes, our cognitive ability too. You know, because you read a book and you know something, but you don't have to hold it with you and carry it around anymore.
And also, you don't have to be alive to teach somebody. You don't have to be alive to teach somebody 1,500 years in the future either, if you write things down.
All things that help us cultivate meaning in life, to understand wisdom, to help make the best use of our science. How do we not only deal with ourselves and other people, but how do we make the best use of the powers that we have and the tools we have at hand today, to get that deep continuity of emergence and development of excellence, see how we take part in it, how we belong in it, to see how meaning making fits into this whole process.
I said Marcus Aurelius. I think
so. It's ultimately to see our normative order that we're in, and how self-transcendence, enlightenment helps us correct for the historical factors and perennial problems.
I may misname somebody. The wise guy, the emperor, philosopher. Now it's completely gone.
Marcus Aurelius.
Was that Marcus Aurelius? Okay.
I think that's who you named.
Yes. Was that right? Because I'm feeling like it
I believe so, yeah.
Okay.
It was.
That guy.
One of the Stoics.
Yeah, yeah.
Lead Stoic.
The lead Stoic, yeah. Okay.
Not even lead Stoic, but he was one that really
Well,
did
he's the one
deeply
that
embody.
sticks out to most people when you say Stoic. They're like,
Yeah,
that
the journals.
guy. Yeah.
That guy.
The guy who was just talking to himself, basically, in his book. And too many people read it as like a prescription for how I should live life. He's like, no, it's not a prescription.
A lot of it is, it can be prescriptory.
He was a pretty smart guy, but it was mostly just like,
thoughts,
trying to figure things out.
Yeah, really.
By writing it out and figuring it out, It's like that gets into the
answer's often in the question, so he found ways
internalizing and embodying previous teachers. That's what he was doing. He was doing.
He found ways to discipline himself
within himself, and doing what Plato did with the his
symposium
dialogues
and the dialogues. Yeah,
because the dialogue is two people and monologue's one person, but it was just one person dialoguing with himself. And then Socrates took that and was like, let's do it to everybody at the market.
Socrates, then let's do it together.
Yeah. So we need to
communally develop anagoge, that orientation towards life that Jesus exhibited for us, that the Buddha exhibited for us, that the wisest that we have ever remembered have exhibited for us. So we need transcendence, and transcendence can be seen as good enough, and recognizing the sacred depths of nature. That's the one
and it's
book.
Funny, her name was good enough as well. The name of the author is good enough.
Yeah.
Which I like.
I like that because that's like I like how the universe kind of puts the answers in like little cosmic jokes like that too.
But yeah, it's instead of transcendence above, it's transcendence into the depths of nature or the psyche too. That's a
awe and wonder, all things that develop wisdom.
Yeah, it's a great way to look at instead of this two worlds strata.
Mythology, where there's like what transcends us is beyond and separated from us. It's more panentheism, where not only is God within all things, God is still beyond all things as well. So it's both.
Opposed to rising above.
It's both and.
Yeah.
It is, of course, we are cognizant of some kind of what you could term a miracle because we have no words for how to describe it. What's an adjective for the wonder of something like a universe occurring? Then peopling and that have self-reflectiveness to them that can so the universe becoming self-aware through them and looking back and reflecting on itself. Like what words do we have that even come close? We need books
to
tell that story.
What Good Enough was doing with this was she was changing the fundamental or challenging the fundamental grammar of transcendence. So instead of just transcendence above, it's like, well, it's into the depths of.
Yes, to help us solve for the
deeply.
errors that we've inherited from our two worlds mythologies, and our disconnections and mistranslations and understandings of these old systems that previously were quite different experiences for us to take part in. Early on, to be a Christian was, of course, to embody the way of Christ, not to merely believe that he's the one and only Son of God, and then proclaim that as belief, and think of faith as mere belief and obedience out of order, when it's really faithfulness, is the correct translation or sense that we can get from that word that ancient Hebrew is pointing to.
Actually got to walk.
That we use the word faith for. It's really about faithfulness, a partnership, taking like faithfulness to a partner in some kind of relationship or some kind of project that you're working on. Being faithful to that, you're embodying a certain posture towards life, towards what you're being involved in. And if you do so lovingly and unconditionally, then you are most open, and then we can transcend to our higher capacities. We may flow together in that way.
Yeah, it's a walking of the trail opposed to just sitting at the trailhead saying, "Oh, this is the trail."
That's why we call it the way. And the Tao, it's that squiggly line between that's showing us, how we're walking that way. That it's also a circle, but it's separating. It's this encompassing of two different sides of life, depicting the interrelating opposites: the hot, the cold, the light, the dark, and each one has a little bit of the other in it. You can't have hot without cold or light without dark. So how would a universe be possible without? Well, here's the Tao's way of describing the underlying nature of reality, as well as the way, because that way is constantly going to be changing depending on where you are on the path. Do you need a little bit more yin or yang in this moment? It's not always good or evil. It could be, attentive or relaxed,
Well, sometimes opponent processes, which are They need each other.
These are machines that help us aid in our relevance realization to be able to know what's relevant in any given moment in life.
So
It's all making sense now. How cool, man.
So we went into
the narrative order,
order, which points to a cosmic telos, and like a telos is not an open-ended thing. There's this story, and it's got an end.
A target point that's open-ended for us.
So that's what we need to get to, and perhaps
like evolution and relevance realization are there open-ended, ongoing things.
It was kind of sad to hear him say, is like, you know, like, yeah, we like the narrative order. We can't rescue the narrative order.
It was sad to hear this part, but then I thought about it.
It makes sense though.
It's an we still get to celebrate our stories and art, but we're not attached to them as the one and only absolute truth
the
about anything.
The story's not the be-all, end-all.
No, it's
what
not.
Are you getting out of
we're
it?
We're not done interpreting
anything.
Even in Christianity. Christianity isn't done
well,
describing our relationship with God. So wherever tradition you come from is fine. We just got to recognize that all of our traditions that are coming from an agapic standpoint are on the same mission, and they are complementary, and they can get to know each other and communicate and help each other along the way. We don't have to be warring and fighting over which one is right together.
Yeah, exactly.
We got to find the deep aspects of them that are incongruent.
The stories are not independent existing things or existing independently. They're all talking about the same thing.
Different groups of humans culturally trying to find ways to relate with the ineffable, and we've done it throughout history, and it's something beautiful and exciting. We've never finished, and we've never come close to fully describing this thing that we call God or the cosmos. We don't know why it is or what it is exactly, but that it is somehow filled with a sense of deep love and wonder and awe that is co-creative, that we get to be involved in.
So the question you asked is it possible to move into a post-narrative way of being? It's like we need to go not leave narrative behind, but go beyond it.
Because we need that open-ended optimization, that open-endedness to be able to continually optimize and continue to be in optimal relation with this world.
So higher states of
regardless
consciousness
of time that we're in
allow you to exist in deep oneness beyond just the narrative function.
That's right. Of deep connectedness and at one-ment.
And then my last note here was that long thing that I got.
That's how we atone, is to be at one. Yeah. If you act as though you are at one with everything, then you're not going to sin, a.k.a. miss the mark or fall short as much. And that's really all that sin means. It's nothing that we should have ever used as like a shameful word. It's an understanding that it's a term for aiming an arrow. When you fall short or miss the mark,
before you get good at it, you're gonna miss.
Inevitably, yeah.
Well, so at our show that we did at the Blue Fox in Winchester last weekend, I brought up, in mixed company, as far as, we had a Zen Buddhist, we had me and Chris, we had some, more modern age sensibility folk, good folk at everything, but the idea of sin and the scoffing came up, and something came to my mind. Perhaps the original sin is the realizing that there is a mark to be missed. That's the eating of the fruit of the tree of knowledge. Realizing that there is a mark that you can miss.
Dude, that's awesome. I like that.
That's the original sin. And it's not
great
a curse.
Point to make in that
It's
moment.
actually a blessing to know that there is a mark. Yes, there is suffering missing the mark.
There is a higher level, higher way of being that we can all take part in.
Yeah. And
higher as in more optimal for us, for our inner joy and the joy of others, and our mutual growth. I mean, it's
because I don't like the demagogic interpretation of that, whereas
it's what we're all looking for, right?
What the snake was saying, God doesn't want you to know that you could be like God and all this stuff. I don't like that. That the snake is still continued on in life, where it's like God is the Satan force that is just keeping us in prison. I don't believe in that. I think we were innocent babes, and then we realized there is a direction, there is a goal, there is a mark we can shoot for. Cursing and a blessing as it is, there is a mark.
Our
now.
emotions grew stronger, and our experience of our emotions grew stronger, and it aided us in being able to further optimally evolve with the world. But it was also a double-edged sword that we didn't know how to deal with.
It's actually interesting we're talking about it, because
we started to feel our deep fears of and realize that
the world isn't safe. And you can die. It's cold. Yeah, your pee-pee hanging out is liability.
All of the emotions became more and more pronounced. The more aware we became. So the more effective we became, but then we became more aware further, and it's been a lot for us to take.
So actually, from this,
That's why we started making music, I think, and dancing to try and get that energy out. How do we deal with these emotions and ride them?
Perhaps, the biting the apple was gaining fluency in the idea, which creates insights. Then we go into flow, and then you have this mystical experience, and then this transformative experience
as a result,
over and over and over again. And
keeps feeding in on itself.
The story of us being evicted as a species from Eden actually kind of goes this way.
Right.
We had fluency. We knew all of Eden, and we gained this insight.
Mm-hmm.
And now that we have this insight, we're cast out.
Yeah.
We have to find our flow in reality, in the real world, that isn't this sheltered, creche for us. Then we are having mystical experiences, all the, any story that's worth its salt as far as religious stories, there is this mystical experience that somebody is having,
every time.
Or groups of people, and then they transform. And,
then the people transform, hopefully.
And like the Torah is goes early on pretty in depth into the rules that are created through these, insights, flowing, messing up, having mystical experiences that realign you, transforming, and then trying to write it down to, so the next generations don't have to go through it exactly the same way, and don't have to kill their brothers, and don't have to,
we're on a growth trajectory. We treat our past ancestors as though everyone started out perfect, knowing everything that was ever to be known by the end of time, so we should be perfectly moral. But no, actually, we came from, walking, talking primates into this.
Well, actually, before we were walking and talking, we were just
Yeah.
grunting and gesturing. So we've come far, but not so far as to be completely alienated from the world in which we came from.
We can still be in a state of wonder of this world at any moment quite easily. Just look up at the sky and let that natural process of wonder come out of you. Every time that we look for joy, that we joke around, that we're playing, that we're having fun, we are taking part in that natural wonder. You can do so in mindfulness and deep contemplation and meditation, and you can do so with others. We can even sing of our joy of the beloved.
We can do it with joy
transcendent
too.
mystery together. Yeah,
even in the suffering, you can do it with joy as well.
That's why we've developed churches and temples, prayer and meditation, because it helps us home ourselves against that sense of domicide, that sense of meaninglessness and homelessness within the world, and
which is palpable at this point.
Really is, I know, for a lot of people, and that's why we've had these rising percentages of depression and suicide rate and so on and so forth that are rapidly rising,
and just mindless violence and destruction.
Just the last decade, and really increasing with the pandemic and the lockdown era, and it's continuing on. It's these things change us if we allow them to in a negative way and turn us into negative trajectory. But we don't have to blame our experience of reality on the outside. We also have a choice in how we respond, how we can even choose to change how we feel about something, but certainly in how we respond to it. And that's where the real responsibility lies. Don't give anyone permission to take you out of your optimal state. Let's continually find a way to hone in on that and feel ever more that beautiful, blissful experience of flow state that we also all have access to. It's it's a beautiful hope, and there's a way for us to surf this tidal wave as though it were an adventure that we get to experience in together. A story that we get to write and share together and hand down. Whatever we do here is going to affect those that come after us. So why not think of that in a loving sense, not as just like a heavy burden or responsibility, but like, oh, what a gift. We're gonna do the best we can. We're at least gonna go out shining, beautifully singing, and in fireworks with people like Vervaeke aiding and inspiring us. So that's what I'm excited about, man. I'm really looking forward to the next episode here. The religion of no religion. So it's still religio. There's still community. There's still a dedication to endeavoring to continually improve ourselves and become more loving and unconditional beings. There's still the experience of deep wonder for whatever you want to call that great mystery, be it God or the absolute or the one. I care not particularly for the words that people use so much as the actions that we take on, particularly at this point in history, because this is it. We're at a beautiful climax. We're at a culmination point to where we get to wake up, and a lot more of us get to decide now, what are we going to choose? What are we going to do with this co-creative history that we get to unfold together? It's a trip.
Well, and we're the last of this age to be doing it. So whatever comes with the next age, we're definitely on the precipice between two great ages. We don't know if the next one, and this past one was, I guess, marked with the birth of Jesus as its beginning and its end, global war catastrophe. If you look at the short period, World War II was nothing to sneeze at. And that seems to be markers of an age. You have periods of insane strife.
We've been tracking these ages. We're supposed to be moving from that age of Pisces, right, into the age of Aquarius.
Aquarius, yeah. So, Jesus, the two fish.
Egalitarian. We have been becoming more egalitarian.
Yeah, but I think it's going to be
that
less
would be
of
the
the
new
sex
age.
Egalitarian and more of each
full-on
person
true egalitarianism.
truly pulling their own weight to become a full person and help other people be people instead of
potential for a
relying
golden
on other
age if we
people to
take
do
the
it.
right track at this Y that we're coming up to here. It feels like it's either downward spiral or upward spiral, and so we're right now in the process of trying to counteract that downward spiral here with John Vervaeke. So thank you guys so much for tuning in with us. This series has been amazing, and it's just getting better and better. And I'm honored to have anybody that's here with us, listening and joining us in this process. And we're here with you. So feel free to write in and comment on the show here. At some point here, I might even get good at interacting with people during a live stream, but we're not at the point to where most of you guys are tuning in after the fact on the podcast, on the audio side of things. But we are here on YouTube, guys, so feel free to find Actuali Podcast on YouTube. Like and subscribe. Make sure to give Vervaeke some love. Likes and subscribes as well. Comments really help the algorithm, so drop whatever you got to say. Any questions or comments, we're happy to hear them, and we will respond as best we can. And that's all I got, man. How you feeling?
Just sweating because it's hot.
It is hot. It's getting progressively
if you notice,
humid
I'm like
tonight,
and I'm a healthy sweater, so But
makeup. All right, y'all. We love you guys. Thank you so much for tuning into this episode of Meaning Making 101 on Actuali Podcast. I've been Chris.
I've been DJ.
See you next time.